Hello, I'm Michael Opitz, your host, and I want to welcome you to our fourth Internet radio broadcast. Our show today includes my guest host, Christina Jeffrey, Ph.D. Political Science, former House historian and college professor. Garland Favorito, expert on Georgia's unverifiable voting machines, will join us shortly to continue his discussion from our last program on electronic voting machines and explore alternatives to our current electronic systems. To start out today's program, there's so much going on in the news with the House and the Senate, with the House of Representatives passing a CR which includes the defunding of Obamacare. So it's a continuing resolution that funds key areas of government operation through mid-December to ensure there is no shutdown of federal government. However, the CR did not fund Obamacare. Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, said the CR is dead on arrival in the Senate. President Obama said that he'd veto if it came to his desk. He said that Obamacare in its current form is non-negotiable. And there's also a deadline on the debt ceiling in mid-December. And without addressing this problem, or actually the deadline on the debt ceiling is mid-October. But the funding CR will fund the government through December. A lot of dates and little complexity in this. But without addressing the debt ceiling problem, there could be a government shutdown. So how do we keep from spending ourselves into bankruptcy and get a handle on federal government spending? Christine, I bet you have some ideas on that.
Well, I think this is a good start, actually. It's a move to the common ground and not the new normal. The middle ground is always the new normal, and the new normal is always to the left. And it does not help. It does not help the common man. It does not help the middle class. It does not help Americans who want to work for a living. It doesn't help families that want to raise their children with a decent standard of living and give them good educations. It doesn't help the ordinary American, but it really does help the 7 richest counties in America.
What are those counties, Christina?
You always ask me the hardest questions, Michael. Well, let's see. I'm sure Fairfax, Virginia is one of them, and Prince William County in Maryland is one of them, and Arlington County in Virginia. That's 3 out of 7. That's all you're going to get at this distance. Well, and the other 4 are close by.
It sounds like the heart of the military and commercial industrial complex, as well as the heart of the lobbyists who have that revolving door in and out of Congress as staffers and other congressional representatives.
Well, Michael, once upon a time, and not so very long ago, say 1980. Maybe, and a lot of senators have always gotten beaten. Senators tend to get out of touch, and then they tend to get beaten. So there's always been a revolving door of senators. It's unlike Congress, the House. It's unlike the House. But today, instead of 3 or 4% of retiring senators becoming lobbyists, 50% of them become lobbyists.
And then they go from lobbyists to key positions in the various federal agencies and back to lobbyists again. It's rather incestuous, and it certainly does not play to good government. It's a shell game.
It's lucrative, and they're all the leftist media is always trying to take our guns and take our political free speech. And they say the problem with government is all these $10 contributions that we make to political action committees and to grassroots candidates and to tea parties. That's the problem. That's why the IRS has to investigate us. The problem is the tax money that is extracted from us unwillingly. Those political dollars, we voluntarily pay those. And then it goes to Washington and is used to make our life miserable.
Yeah, that certainly is true. I've noticed in the last couple of days since the Republicans looked as if they were in the House, we're going to pass the continuing resolution coupled with defunding Obamacare, that the media, including Fox, much to my surprise, including Charles Krauthammer, whom I have a great deal of respect for, Krauthammer's comment was, "This is absolutely crazy," and they have such a chorus on just rolling over and assuming that Obamacare is going to collapse under its own weight and the Republicans will come out better for it, not having done anything. And they keep referring, and I've heard this from several news commentators, that they're doing a kabuki dance.
Yes, and they are also they say that it's a suicide mission, that they're being forced into this position by the crazy Tea Party right wing of the Republican Party, and this is not what the this is not what the congressmen really want to do. Well, then what was the 37 times that they voted to repeal Obamacare?
That's right, and there's another thing I've not heard anyone mention. I mentioned it. I tweeted this yesterday, and to my surprise, 10 other people retweeted it. And the comment was essentially that I've not heard any news media organization state that 50 to 60% of the American public, citizens, are against Obamacare. So the House of Representatives is responding.
They are representing.
That's right. That's what a representative republic is about. But none of them are talking about that this is what the people want. But yet they'll say it's the law of the land. Well, of course, prohibition was the law of the land. Segregation was the law of the land. So you can change the law or change the people.
Defense of marriage was the law of the land. Remember that?
Say that again?
Remember the Defense of Marriage Act?
That's right.
That was voted into law by some 90% of members of Congress?
And
I might be wrong about that, but it was a high percentage.
It was a high percentage, and Obama, just with a stroke of the pen, or did he even use a
He didn't even use it. He just refused. He's supposed to execute the law. That's what the executive is supposed to do. And when the executive doesn't execute the law and abandons the rule of law, you're going to get trickle-down lawlessness all the way down to Chicago.
Down to Chicago or up to Chicago? That opens up a whole new can of worms. My goodness.
We can't take up all of our time, Michael, without explaining the strategy, because once the sitting on the fence Republican senators realize that their constituents are on to what's going on up there, they're not going to be able to pull the wool over their eyes. They're less likely to participate in that effort.
And all it takes is 41 Republican senators to stop Harry Reid and the Senate from destroying the chance to defund Obamacare and decouple it from the legislation. So
how many do we have?
I don't know how many we have on the head count.
I mean total 45.
45.
Okay, so 45. only 4, and 4 can still misbehave, and we know who the likely suspects are there. But can you explain how that's going to work and what Harry Reid is going to try in order to avoid it? I can start it. I'll start with the.
Go ahead.
Harry Reid is going to call for a vote on the House bill, and dare the Republicans to vote against it. The Republicans then have to start a filibuster so that the vote can't take place. And
I think this is a real filibuster, kind of like Mr. Smith goes to Washington And Rand Paul did that not
I
long
hope
ago.
so. I mean, why wouldn't you do a real filibuster when you can, when you can get the floor and you can talk and you can make your case to the American people? It would be silly to do one of those. Let's pretend like everything's going on like normal.
The pretend filibuster, as I like to call it, where they said, "Excuse me, we're filibustering this," duly noted, and on it goes. But
right.
I've even heard that Ted Cruz is strongly considering joining in that filibuster. But a lot of activity, and I wish we had more time, Christina, to talk about the whirlwind that's going on in Washington, and as we anxiously await the unfolding of events.
Well, the school teacher in me just has to say one more sentence, and that is, if they filibuster, the Reid will call for cloture, which means a cloture vote is to end the debate. That's where the 41 votes are needed.
Do you want to make any bets on the outcome of that?
I think it totally depends on the American people.
I think you're right. When they get the phone calls, when they get the pressure from the constituents, they bend.
Mm-hmm.
They can't figure it out. They can't seem to figure it out on their own, but under pressure, they get the message.
When they feel the heat, they see the light.
And with that, Christina, I'd like to reintroduce Garland Favorito. He was the key participant on our last show regarding the electronic voting machines. And for those of you who did not hear the last show, it's still available online at www.decidingthevote.com, and that's where everyone can go to listen to our Internet radio broadcast. But Garland Favorito has been involved in the voting machine issue for many, many years. He took this issue to the Fulton County Superior Court, where the judge did not rule on the evidence presented, and then he appealed it to the Georgia Supreme Court, where once again the justices refused to rule on the evidence presented and ruled in favor of the Diebold voting machines, which is a product in the Georgia election system of a big lobbying firm here in Georgia, who, as I understand, also alleged, let me use that word alleged, that they also received a sales commission for the voting machines, and the state legislators are terrified to buck the lobbyists and get rid of these voting machines so we can be assured of an honest election. I mean, this is something that Stalin would have just dearly loved. But with that, Garland, how are you doing today?
Great, Michael. Thanks for having me back, and Christina, thank you. It's good to talk with you again, as always.
Likewise.
Garland, we talked a great deal about the instances of potential voter fraud and vote anomalies, but we didn't cover what should be done and what can be done. What are our alternatives to these current electronic voting machines?
Yeah, that's right, Mike. Yes, that's right, Michael. So we covered last show. We covered a lot of the anomalies and things that have happened in the past, and we looked a little bit nationally at what went on. For example, like Alvin Green in South Carolina and the bizarre situation there. And to focusing in on statewide unverifiable voting, and which I think we talked about, Georgia, South Carolina, Maryland, some other states have that. But kind of honing in on the Georgia situation, which is pretty common on the other couple of states as well. I thought maybe we'd just talk about the problems a little bit. Just let's understand the technical problems, and then some of the false arguments we have heard coming from the states, and then of course we'll get into some solutions. So anyway, just recapping from our last presentation, we just touched on the actual technical problem is that fraud and errors are basically undetectable statewide for these voting machines because they were implemented at the state level. So what does that mean to the voter? Well, basically, you, Michael and Christina, as a voter, as you already know, you cannot verify that the votes that you actually cast were recorded for the candidates that you chose.
But Garland, if I may interrupt here, we are constantly told, even from Kennesaw State University, that there is an internal tape that records all the votes to make sure that there is no voter fraud.
Well, and technically that is correct. That's one of the arguments. There is an internal card and an internal hard drive which stores the votes. However, that is, as you just said, Michael, is internal to the machine. It's not independent of the machine. So the problem with that is, and the state's argument is that, well, we can print that out and show you what you voted for. Well, the problem with that is that it prints out and it records that independent audit trail or that internal audit trail after the vote has been recorded and could have been corrupted. So you can't have an internal. There really isn't need to say it's an internal audit trail because an internal audit trail is kind of like the fox guarding the hen house type approach. So the vote could be recorded and corrupted before the record of that is actually recorded by the machine. So you have to establish your audit trail before you cast the vote. And then you have a legitimate audit trail.
Thank you for explaining that, Garland.
Sure thing. So going back to what we were talking about, the votes, basically we got three problems, fundamentally problems. You as a voter cannot, as we talked about, you can't verify that the votes that you have seen on the screen were actually recorded on your card. So that what you saw went poof into thin air, and you don't really know if it's in the card, and nobody really knows. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that the election officials cannot audit the election results. So all they do is reprint or they just certify whatever the system prints out. So they don't have any way of knowing that total that the system printed out is actually correct. No way to verify that. So they're basically checking a box as a secretarial function for the certification process. And then, as y'all know, the third most significant problem is that there's no ballot of record that can be recounted in the event of a close race. So all they do is reprint the previous unverifiable results.
You said they can't. You said they can't be recounted, right?
It's going to be the same every time.
Exactly, and that's what they have.
No real recount.
Right. They just reprint. It's a reprint of the previous results, which were unverifiable to begin with and unauditable. And
they'll never be any different.
Exactly. And the Kennesaw State people have acknowledged that under oath and in our deposition for the case that you mentioned, Michael, went to the Supreme Court in Georgia.
Garland, you remember last time we talked about people, watching the screen change their vote. So let's say they voted a straight ticket, and before they hit send, they noticed that they're voting for some Republicans.
Right.
Since we know that happens, and there's a name for it, you told me the name for it, since we know that happens, it seems plausible. I mean, it seems almost inevitable that some oblivious people are hitting, vote after that's happened because they weren't paying any attention. They weren't expecting that to happen.
Well, that's right. And what that's called is a calibration error, and it's very, very common. It probably has happened, and in fact, it has happened in every state that has these machines. So what that means is that the screen has what they call pixels, little dots, and you have what we call an X and Y coordinate, which is the horizontal and vertical coordinate. So the coordinates are a little bit off as to where they should be from where you actually touch to record that vote. So when the coordinates are not quite programmed correctly, somebody could touch a little bit outside or just slightly outside of where they're supposed to touch, and could record and show for the other candidate. It happens all the time, and as you said, I'm sure people have voted for the wrong person, Christine, as you were explaining. So, but my question is, okay, at least you can see that error, and you might be able to correct it before you actually cast your ballot. But what about the recording errors that might occur that you can't see? How will we deal with that?
Do they admit that recording errors happen? Do they admit that?
No, they will not admit that there are recording errors, and there's no way to determine if there are recording errors or if the machine is recording correctly on Election Day. And that is the fundamental flaw, that there's no way to prove that the machines, or at least ones with audit trails, are counting correctly.
And if you report that problem to the election official in the voting precinct, what authority does that election official have to allow you to recast your vote or to discount your vote?
Oh, he does have the authority for those calibration errors.
No, as it happens right then. Can you say, can I go back and revote this?
Yeah, they do. I've seen it happen.
Garland, what's your experience been on that?
Well, the issue is that they're going to run across there is if you've already recorded a vote on your card, you're going to be hard-pressed.
You're right.
You're going to be hard-pressed.
No, you can't do it after you've hit vote. It's before you hit vote. Yeah, sorry.
Correct. That's right. Before you hit vote, that's fine. And you're right, Christina. That has happened. It's been identified before they hit vote, and they have shown that to the elections officials, and they have let them recast their vote. Of course, it hasn't been cast yet. But then the issue is once it has been cast, then of course the precinct worker can't do anything about it. And so you've got to be paying very close attention that summary screen actually has on it what you voted for.
Has anybody brought a federal civil rights, voting rights case saying that they saw that happen, and they've got these workers here who were standing right there when it happened, and you complained immediately, and you lost your right to vote?
Well, are you sitting down, Christina?
This has happened.
Because
that was your case.
Actually, you raised a very good question here, because the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act, does not cover these types of problems or electronic vote counting or anything like that, because it discriminates against all Americans equally.
So you have an equal opportunity chance to lose your vote.
Exactly. And that is...
How do we know it's equal?
Right. Well, if anybody can lose it, then it's equal. So therefore, the U.S. Justice Department and the Voting Rights Act has no jurisdiction whatsoever to do anything. I was floored because I actually thought the very same thing as you did. I thought, I'm going to see what the U.S. Justice Department is going to say about this. And so I talked to one of the key attorneys in the Justice Department who handles the voting rights cases. And basically that's exactly what she told me. So, unless it's discriminatory against one segment of Americans, there's nothing that they can do.
So we just need a law that says you can't use you can't use unverifiable voting machines.
And that's the proper solution with the old, and Garland's going to be talking about this, but what our options are. But with the Scantron optical scanners, you fill in the bubble on a sheet of paper, and you obviously, if you make a mistake, you can erase it and re-enter it, and you get to review your ballot before you turn it in. And those ballots are in a secure box, and because they're hard copy, it's available for a recount. If you can't do a recount, I maintain that it's a fraudulent election because you can never verify it. But please continue.
Right, and before we get to the solutions, I think we probably should address this one other argument that you hear all the time, and that is the state's argument that we certified these machines ahead of time.
Yeah,
Therefore,
right.
we know that they are counting correctly on Election Day.
But they have this calibration error and whatever, and there may be other errors.
Well, right,
circular.
Right. And the problem with that argument, it sounds logical on the surface, but what most people don't know, in addition to the calibration errors that you run across, the voting machines can be programmed to record differently on Election Day than they do during the testing. So, and they could accidentally record differently on Election Day, as you just explained, Christina, with the calibration error. That's more of an accidental type thing and a random occurrence, but they could be literally programmed very easily to show perfect results during certification and then count completely differently on Election Day, switching votes between candidates and so on. There's several different ways that can happen. One is you can program the machine to count differently after a certain number of ballots are counted. So let's say it counts the first 100 perfectly, and then it starts swapping votes for the next 100. So it could pass the test case and the certification fine and then count differently in Election Day. That's one way. Another way is it can count differently based on a given date. The date of the testing is different than the date of the election. So that's another way it could count differently. And the third and most foolproof way for it to count differently is simply by the software recognizing that it's in test mode versus election mode. So during the certification, they have to put the machine into test mode. When they conduct an election, they flip the switch and move it from test mode to election mode. The software can recognize that. It can query the machine to say, am I in test mode or election mode? And then it can use a totally different algorithm on Election Day than it used during the certification process.
Garland, have we had a verifiable case where votes in the test mode were merged with actual votes in an election?
Well, yes, absolutely, Michael, and I think you are aware of a couple of these. One out there, the first one in 2002 in Cobb County, where I think 3,256 test votes were merged in with the election results. That was back in 2002 when they first got the machines. Now, Cobb County caught that error, and they fixed it before they finally certified the results. However, the case I know you're familiar with was down in Lowndes County in 2008. Yes. And in Lowndes County, I think 947 or so test votes were included in the live election results, and the county supervisors certified them with the extra votes. It went up to the elections division in the state of Georgia, and they caught the error. They said, well, you got 947 extra votes here. Send it back down to the county for correction. And that is when the county elections director down there blamed the whole thing on a tester who was not even present when the votes were certified on election night.
That was Laura Gallegos.
And of course that tester was Laura Gallegos. And you know the rest of that story very well, as she ended up losing her job and was prosecuted, and we finally were able to get her off because she didn't really do anything wrong. In fact, refused to. They were trying to get her to plead guilty to something she didn't do, and eventually she was terminated unjustly.
And she's a single mother of two.
Mm-hmm.
She lost property. She was referred to the Attorney General's office for prosecution, and she was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing, but she wasn't given her job back, and that sent a strong message to all the voting machine technicians statewide that if you become a whistleblower, not only will you lose your job, but you may be referred to for criminal prosecution. What a way to shut the people up who want to tell the truth about a corrupt election process.
Exactly.
Does Georgia have a whistleblower law?
That's a good question, Christina. Now, technically speaking, Laura was not actually a whistleblower per se. What she did, when she was actually the scapegoat, they attempted to blame for everything that went wrong.
Well,
and
when you refuse to be the scapegoat, you are blowing the whistle.
Right.
In effect.
Wasn't she told that if she admitted wrongdoing, she would receive a severance package, and if she did not, she would be dismissed without any compensation at all?
Yes, absolutely, Michael, and that's exactly what happened.
And
exactly.
I know
she ought to get the Friend of the Taxpayer award or the Friend of the Common Man award.
Well,
and her job back.
Garland and I attended ethics hearings down there, and we saw the press lined up against the wall. That's the Atlanta TV press and the Atlanta print press. And we went up to them when there was discussion on Laura Gallegos and tried to get them to tell Laura's story, tried to get them to tell the story on the voting machines. In Garland, we met with, they wouldn't do it.
Exactly. We held a press conference, sent the press release to every major news agency in the city of Atlanta, as well as throughout the state, explained the whole case. No one showed up for the press conference, and the only coverage that I think Laura got out of that was in Valdosta, her hometown, ran an article on it, and possibly maybe a TV station down in Albany, I think, picked it up and did one little blurb on it.
Who was the Secretary? Who was the Secretary of State, Garland, at that time, who was involved in this?
The Secretary of State, who had where the Lowndes County connection, the county supervisor had her connections through, was Secretary of State Karen Handel at that time.
And what could Karen Handel have done?
Well, Karen actually had, first of all, established the Inspector General's office that attempted to prosecute Laura Gallegos.
Oh, dear.
So the Secretary of State didn't even have an Inspector General's office before Karen Handel became the Secretary of State. So she established the office and hired Sean LaGrua to do that. Sean was the one who oversaw that investigation. The county elections director down there in Lowndes was personal friends with Karen Handel, escorted her around when Karen visited her down in Lowndes, and Sean, who did the dirty work there to protect the county elections officials. She eventually we found out later, had a track record of doing these kinds of things when she was a DeKalb prosecutor. And she eventually was the subject of over 70 impeachment articles in the Georgia House. And although that was well known to the governor, Governor Perdue at that time, he appointed her, in spite of all that, to a Fulton County judgeship, and now she sits as a judge in Fulton County.
Oh my!
So we not only have questions about the voting machines, and these voting machines were lobbied by Massey Bowers, lobbying firm, but we also see stuff going on behind the scenes, apart totally from the questionable results of the voting machines. So this is a bigger story than what typically appears on the surface.
Please tell me that's not Michael Bowers.
Yes, it is, Christina. So, and that's a great point. So, Michael, we got to go into that a little bit.
Go right ahead, please.
As we and we still have time to get to the solutions. So, this is the classic story that allows you to understand how lobbyists corrupt the state legislature and the state elections or processes in general, and basically the executive branch as well. So the voting machines were purchased in 2002 by former Secretary of State Kathy Cox, who had she signed a $54 million contract, plus there was another $5 million or so for other stuff, training and so on. Signed that even though the voting machines did not have an independent audit trail of each vote cast, as the law required at the time she signed the contract. Now, the lobbyist
now,
for
Garland,
that...
didn't she and a couple of her key lieutenants end up going after she was voted out of office, or who in her office ended up going to work for Diebold?
Oh, yes. The elections director, Kathy Rogers, and her press secretary both ended up, I think it was Chris Riggle, they both ended up at Diebold.
Gosh, you don't even have to be a conspiracy theorist to find this all very disturbing.
Right, and there's not even, these facts are not even in dispute. So, yeah, that's exactly a good point, Michael. And then, so Kathy Cox, at that time, the lobbyist for Diebold, which was originally Global Election Systems, was her former boss, Louis Massey, the former Secretary of State. So he was the lobbyist for the original purchase, which I'm sure, as you mentioned earlier, was worth a significant commission for him, for his efforts.
So they were lobbying and also receiving a sales commission?
I'm sure that lobbyist got a sales commission for that $54 million sale. Okay, I don't know that it's public. We know how much it was, but I'm sure that he was rewarded for making that deal. But so Louis Massey goes and makes a partnership with Bruce Bowers, the son of Michael Bowers, who is, and they call this Massey Bowers, and this is a lobbyist firm. As you know, it's one of the most powerful lobbyist firms in the state of Georgia. And you have now, of course, as you were alluding to, Christina, Bruce Bowers is the son of Michael Bowers, the popular former Republican Attorney General and former gubernatorial candidate. And then Louis Massey is the popular former Democrats Secretary of State. Bowers, of course, was Republicans. So now you have a Democrat and a Republican in very, very high places. They are controlling this lobbying firm. So regardless of whether the Secretary of State was a Democrat, like Kathy Cox, or a Republican, like Karen Handel, they can cover both sides of the political spectrum and lobby for that vendor which in this case was Debo.
Did they make a campaign contribution to Karen Handel's campaign for Secretary of
multiple campaign contributions. So, and as you know, Michael, Karen was a huge supporter of changing the machines out. She basically was eloquent in explaining what was wrong with these machines. I was a big supporter of hers in 2006 when she ran for the Secretary of State's office. But once she became elected, she flipped and then stated there was nothing wrong, and just completely did a 180-degree about-face. And as you mentioned, Michael, it's public knowledge. You just go out and look on the campaign contributions. You'll find $25,000 at least that came in from the Bowers family, employees of Massey Bowers, and so on. And those are just the public campaign contributions. We don't even know how much else and what else went on behind the closed doors to help Karen get elected. But she does and has always acknowledged that Michael and Betty Rose Bowers were instrumental in getting her elected in 2006 for the Secretary of State's office. And, of course, that's the father of the voting machine vendor lobbyist partner.
Rob Sims became her chief of staff. Where did Rob Sims come from?
Oh, another great point. Rob Sims, who she appointed as chief of staff, was a partner for none other than Massey and Bowers.
So then
and he went on to right. He went on to become one of her key fundraisers in the gubernatorial campaign against Nathan Deal just a couple of years ago. It's a small world, isn't it?
A lot of shadows here.
Yes, it is. What a small world.
Garland,
I guess.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was saying go ahead. We're seeing some of the background on the voting machines, and this is really important to understand. I had a state legislator tell me several months ago, and I'm not sure if you were present when he told me this, and I won't name the state legislator. He said, you won't get any. He said, you have to understand that Massey Bowers is opposing any change of the voting machine, and many of the state legislators are afraid to take a stance on it because of that.
Uh-huh.
He said, now don't tell anybody I told you that.
And should we be surprised?
No, I guess not.
Yeah. So I guess we've only got a few minutes left, so we probably need to get to the solutions for this problem.
Go right ahead.
So I think there are at least three solutions. Y'all might be able to think of a fourth. But one is we could just simply use paper ballots like other countries do. And that would be, we'd have a record of our vote. That's one possible solution. The other thing you could do is have electronic voting with voter-verified paper audit trails. So what that means is, it's hard to understand without a visual, but there you would see a paper ballot behind glass or plastic. You'd get to verify whether or not that ballot has the votes that you voted on it. And if it does not, you void that ballot. You just say void, and the system allows you to vote again because you haven't cast it. If it is correct, you would say cast the ballot, and then that ballot would go, be cut automatically and placed into a locked ballot box as part of the machine. So the machines would have their own internal locked ballot boxes, and that would be your actual physical of record of your vote that you verified, and that would be retained for recount purposes, and it could also be used to perform selected audits whenever you want. So, or whenever the elections officials decided to do that. So that would solve the three fundamental problems of verifiability, auditability, and recount capability.
Now, before we consider that some people will think this is all radical stuff. I don't think, and I've said this to people during our talks, and we give presentations on this. If standing strong for honest, verifiable voting system is a far right-wing or radical position, then I guess I am. And I make no apologies for that. But the folks need to become very involved on this, because as we see our country spinning around us, a lot of this can be attributed to voter fraud. So voter fraud can take many different forms, whether it's on electronic voting or whether it's stuffing the ballot box. But we do know that Germany and Ireland have thrown out these machines, and New York has, it looks like they've thrown them out too, going back to their old mechanical systems that were built in the early 1900s. But go ahead, Garland.
Well, that's right, and that's the third option that we need to talk about. As you said, and in addition to those states, I believe Florida, Colorado, there's a couple more states, I used to know them all off the top of my head, who have also gone to optical scan, which are the bubble charts that you've talked about before many times. And those are similar to your SAT test, where you would mark a bubble for the candidates of your choice. It's the way that a lot of counties in Georgia used to vote in the past. That then is recorded. You dropped your ballot in a ballot box. You've seen it. You've verified it. You know it's correct. It's retained for the system of record in the ballot box. And the thing that the legislatures liked about this system is that it's very, very cost effective, because you don't have to have 24 voting machines in every precinct. You just have to have one ballot tabulator in that precinct, and that will count all of the votes. So at worst case, you would need that, and you'd need the maybe a ballot marker for the visually impaired in each precinct.
And you don't need software, and you don't need computer experts, and it's a huge cost saving.
Yes, exactly, Christina. Probably just maybe 90%. The testing, the certification, the logistics of taking those machines to the precincts. That would save Georgia, for example, probably about $5 million a year or $10 million per election cycle.
Well, we need the voters' help, the citizens, to call their state legislatures and demand that these legislators get rid of these voting machines, because our democracy, our representative republic is at stake. Garland, this is fascinating. We could go on for another hour, but we're running out of time. Is there anything that you would like to say in the last minute?
Just the last point would be that in case someone's questioning the numbers, the state of Maryland did a survey. They actually, the Maryland legislature commissioned a cost-benefit study, and it concluded that they would save all the money they would spend on those within 8 years, and those voting machines would start paying for themselves and making money for the state of Maryland. Maryland has the exact same machines, or almost identical machines, that Georgia has, so we can experience the same benefit financially by going to verifiable voting.
Garland, thank you very much, and I know we're going to have you back. You and I both are going to be giving a presentation at the Chattahoochee Republican Women this coming Tuesday, but Christina, certainly appreciate your comments and your insight.
Do I get one more? Can I have one more?
Go real fast.
People might be afraid to be associated with you being a right-winger, but they can associate with me because I occupy the common ground. So where most all ordinary Americans want their vote to count.
Well, I don't consider myself a right-winger either, Christine.
Good.
I look at the common ground, what makes sense, and what basically are the elements of good government.
Right.
But we'll be back next week, and we hope that you found the show to be both informative and interesting. Please tell your friends about the show and where to find us. Find us on www.decidingthevote.com. Because if we are to turn our country around, it's going to take all of us working together. My email address is mopitz, O-P-I-T-Z, @mindspring.com. And remember, knowledge is power, ignorance is slavery. This is Michael Opitz wishing you a blessed day.